Winter clothing in medieval life was not fashion, it was a survival system built from scarcity. Most poor people owned only a small set of garments, repaired until the original cloth almost disappeared under patches. Cold entered the body fastest through exposed skin and moving air, so the first goal was to stop drafts at the neck, wrists, waist, and ankles. Inside a dim hut with an ash-gray hearth and a tiny oiled parchment window, dressing began with numb hands and visible breath. Linen went on first because it reduced friction, protected skin from coarse wool, and helped manage sweat so dampness did not turn into a freezing layer. Over that came thick wool, because wool traps air even when it is not perfectly dry, and trapped air is the real insulation. Layering was done with intent. Cuffs were tied, belts were cinched, and overlaps were created so wind could not find a straight path to bare skin. A hood and felt cap protected the head, which loses heat quickly, while a cloak and mantle created a moving wall against gusts. The body became a sealed bundle, not a shape for comfort. Every seam mattered because a small gap at the collar could become hours of shivering outside. Even the act of attaching a leather pouch mattered, because it kept necessary items close so hands did not have to stay uncovered while searching for tools or food. Footwear showed the same logic. Poor leather shoes were thin and cracked, so people used foot wraps and straw insoles to lift the foot away from cold ground and keep warmth around the toes. Grease or animal fat rubbed into leather helped resist wet snow and slush, because wetness steals heat faster than dry cold. Each step outside punished mistakes. The clothing routine was the first defense before any work began, and it had to be repeated every day because winter did not negotiate with poverty. Once outdoors, clothing had to protect against wind, wet, and constant movement. Medieval winter was often a mix of freezing air and damp conditions, which could be more dangerous than dry cold. Mist, slush, and mud soaked hems and sleeves, then froze as stiff layers that pulled heat away. People responded by shaping garments into wind barriers. Cloaks were folded and overlapped, capes were layered over collars, and drawstrings were tightened to narrow openings around the face. A sheepskin vest under wool added a powerful insulating layer at the core, where keeping blood warm helped protect hands and feet from numbness. Maintenance was not optional. A torn hem or a thinning elbow meant wind could penetrate and begin chilling the body from the inside. Patching, stitching, weighting hems with small stones, and adding fur trim at the collar were practical upgrades that kept air from pumping through the clothing during walking and lifting. Beeswax stiffened seams and helped resist damp, while fat smeared into wool or leather helped shed moisture. People dried garments near warmed stones or weak embers because a soaked cloak became a heavy, cold sponge. Dryness was protection, and every action aimed to restore loft, because loft creates air pockets and air pockets keep heat. The struggle was visible on the body. Wind-burned cheeks, cracked lips, red fingers, and breath fog were daily signs of exposure. People flexed hands inside mittens to keep circulation moving, and they tightened cuffs and wraps as soon as damp chill crept in. Walking in snow and frozen ruts forced short steps, which kept the cloak hem from dragging into slush and kept the insulation from soaking. In markets, alleys, and fields, crowded spaces and wet ground constantly threatened to undo the careful layering. Winter clothing kept people alive by holding warmth close while they labored, carried water, hauled sticks, and endured gusts that could strip heat in minutes. Evening did not end the danger, because sweat and wet fabric could become colder than the outside air once the body stopped moving. Returning to a hut with no strong fire meant the priority was to control moisture and preserve insulating loft for the next day. Doors were barred to stop drafts, cloaks were hung near residual warmth, and garments were folded to keep them off damp earth. Peeling off hose or changing linen was not comfort, it was risk management. A damp base layer pressed against the skin could pull heat away all night and weaken the body for morning work. The final steps were small but decisive. Wringing cloth, scraping mud from shoes, swapping foot wraps, and adding patches prevented tomorrow's cold from exploiting today's damage. Tightening the hood for sleep, tucking the neck wrap, and pulling blankets high kept the body sealed in a warmer pocket. A candle was dimmed to conserve resources, and the room remained hard and cold, but the body could recover if dry layers stayed close and drafts stayed out. The routine was repetitive because winter demanded repetition. The same few items did the work of an entire wardrobe, and each repair extended life. What kept people alive was not a single magical garment, but a system. Linen to manage sweat, wool to trap air, sheepskin to insulate the core, grease and wax to resist damp, and constant adjustment to close gaps. In a poor medieval setting, clothing was a daily shelter that traveled with the body. When daylight returned, the process started again. Layers were pulled on, cuffs tied, belts cinched, and cloaks clasped, because leaving the hut without a sealed barrier meant letting winter into the bloodstream. Survival depended on these ordinary, exhausting details.